The crisp morning air fills the narrow streets of the small Mexican town nestled high in the Sierra Madre mountains. The rising sun casts golden light on red clay rooftops, and the distant sound of a rooster crows, blending with the chatter of merchants setting up their stalls. A bell rings from the modest fire station at the edge of town, signaling the start of another day. Inside the station, Mateo Ramirez pulls on his worn firefighter jacket, his movements steady and precise. He exchanges nods with the other crew. Members, their camaraderie apparent, but tinged with respect for the quiet man who leads by example. Mateo's eyes carry a calm intensity, and his graying temples hint at a life lived beyond the walls of this humble town. Today, the crew gathers around a small wooden table, sipping coffee brewed thick and strong. Conversation flows easily, but the mood shifts as one firefighter, Jorge, leans forward. "Did you hear? The cartel is spreading into the mountains. They're hitting businesses, demanding payment." A heavy silence follows. Another firefighter. Rosa shakes her head. "They wouldn't dare come here. We're too small, too far from the main roads." Mateo's voice cuts through the quiet, calm but firm. "They'll come. If there's profit to be made, they'll come." The crew exchanges uneasy glances, but the tension is broken by the station's alarm bell. A fire at a small bakery in town sends them scrambling to the truck. The drive is short, and the fire is contained quickly. The townspeople gather to watch, offering thanks and small tokens of gratitude. Mateo's focus never wavers, his actions methodical and efficient. As the crew packs up, a sleek black SUV pulls up, its engine humming ominously. 3 men step out, their sharp suits and cold expressions starkly out of place against the town's rustic charm. The leader, a lean man with a scar cutting across his cheek, approaches Mateo. His smile is more a threat than a greeting. "Beautiful morning, no?" His Spanish is clipped and precise. "My boss, Alejandro Cruz, asked me to introduce myself. I'm here to ensure the safety of hard-working establishments like yours." Mateo's gaze doesn't waver. "Our safety doesn't need ensuring." The man's smile tightens. "Of course, but should something unfortunate happen, you'll wish you had someone looking out for you." He gestures toward the bakery. Fires can be unpredictable. Mateo steps forward, closing the distance between them. "This town doesn't need your protection. Tell Alejandro Cruz he's not welcome here." For a moment, the tension is palpable. The man's hand twitches toward his jacket, but he stops himself. He chuckles, low and menacing. "As you wish, but don't say we didn't warn you." The SUV roars away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. The townspeople whisper among themselves, their fear evident. Jorge pulls Mateo aside. "Are you sure about this? We can't fight them?" "They'll come back." Mateo's jaw tightens. "If we give them an inch, they'll take everything. We protect this town, Jorge. That's our job." Later that evening, the fire station feels unusually quiet. The crew's laughter and banter are subdued, replaced by worried murmurs. Mateo sits alone in the station's small office, staring at a photo of his family. His father, a local farmer, taught him the value of standing up for what's right. His mother's kind eyes remind him of the community he now calls home. The door creaks open, and Rosa steps in. "Mateo, I know you want to protect us, but the cartel, they're not like other threats. They don't fight fair." "Neither do I," Mateo replies, his voice low. His past flashes before him, missions in foreign lands, the faces of those he'd fought alongside and those he'd lost. He'd left that life behind, but some battles refused to stay buried. The next morning, the fire station awakens to chaos. The tires of their truck have been slashed, the station's walls defaced, with graffiti bearing the cartel symbol. A message scrawled in blood-red paint reads, "This is just the beginning." The crew stands in stunned silence until Mateo steps forward. "We'll fix this. Get the spare tires from the shed. Jorge, call the mechanic in town and see if he can reinforce the garage locks." Rosa hesitates. "Mateo, what if they come back?" "They will," Mateo says simply, And we'll be ready. As the day wears on, whispers of the cartel's threats spread through the town. At the local market, business owners exchange nervous glances, their usual chatter subdued. An elderly woman selling handmade tortillas shakes her head. We've lived in peace for so long. Why must they bring their violence here? Mateo's presence at the market doesn't go unnoticed. He helps carry a heavy sack of grain for a farmer, his calm demeanor offering a momentary sense of normalcy. But the weight of the town's fear presses on him. Back at the station, the crew works tirelessly to repair the damage. The slashed tires are replaced, the graffiti scrubbed clean, but the unease remains, a shadow that refuses to lift. Jorge approaches Mateo as they finish up for the day. "You know they're testing us," Jorge says, "seeing how far they can push. Then we show them we won't break." Mateo replies. That night, as the town sleeps, a figure moves through the shadows. Mateo surveys the streets from a rooftop, his movements silent and deliberate. His instincts, honed through years of training, guide him as he observes the cartel's men patrolling the outskirts of town. He notes their numbers, their routines. Every detail is etched into his memory. As the moon rises higher, Mateo returns. To the station, he finds Jorge waiting for him, a question in his eyes. Mateo places a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Go home. Rest. Tomorrow's another day." Jorge hesitates but nods, leaving Mateo alone. The quiet of the night wraps around him, but his mind is anything but still. He knows the cartel will escalate. He knows the danger will grow, and he knows that, when the time comes, he will be ready. Act 2. The cartel's first strike. The sound of shattered glass echoes through the fire station as dawn breaks over the town. Mateo is the first to respond, his senses sharp and his movements deliberate. A brick lies in the middle of the floor, wrapped in paper and tied with rough twine. Unfolding the paper reveals a crudely drawn skull, the cartel's calling card, and a single word scrawled beneath, "Paga." Mateo examines the message, his jaw tightening. Jorge and Rosa stand behind him, their faces pale with fear. "They're serious," Rosa whispers. "What do we do now?" Mateo doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he picks up the brick and tosses it aside. "We'll board up the windows. Jorge, see if the hardware store has reinforced glass." His voice is calm, but carries an edge of steel. As the crew works to clean up, the tension in the station grows thicker. Rosa pulls Mateo aside, her eyes searching his. "This isn't just about us anymore. The whole town is afraid. Maybe we should call for help." Mateo shakes his head. "The cartel has people everywhere. If we bring in the wrong kind of attention, it'll only make things worse." The fire station isn't the only target. Overnight, several businesses have been vandalized. Broken windows, spray-painted threats, and slashed tires greet shop owners as they arrive to open for the day. The townspeople gather in the plaza, murmuring in low, worried tones. Fear ripples through the crowd like a tangible force. Mateo stands at the edge of the gathering, observing. He steps forward as the town's mayor, an elderly man named Eduardo, tries to calm the crowd. "Please, everyone," Eduardo says, his voice trembling. "We must stay united. These criminals want to divide us. If we give in to fear, they've already won." A shopkeeper interjects, her voice shaking. "And what do we do when they come back? They've already destroyed my storefront. What's next?" Before Eduardo can respond, Mateo speaks up. "We'll rebuild. We'll stand together. If they want us to break, we won't give them that satisfaction." The crowd turns to him, their expressions a mixture of hope and doubt. Eduardo places a hand on Mateo's shoulder. "You've always been a pillar of this community, Mateo, but how do we fight something this big?" Mateo's eyes harden. One step at a time. Later that day, the fire station receives an emergency call. Smoke billows from a small bakery. On the edge of town, the same bakery that had refused to pay the cartel's protection money. Mateo and his crew race to the scene, their truck rumbling through narrow streets. By the time they arrive, flames have engulfed the building. The owner, a wiry man named Hector, stands outside, his face streaked with soot and despair. "My wife's still inside," he cries. "She's trapped in the back." Mateo doesn't hesitate. "Rosa, Jorge, get the hoses ready. I'm going in." The heat is intense as Mateo enters the burning building, his breathing steady despite the smoke that stings his lungs. He moves quickly, finding Hector's wife huddled in the corner of the kitchen. Lifting her into his arms, he navigates through the flames, his instincts guiding him. Outside, the crowd cheers as Mateo emerges with the woman, coughing but alive. Rosa and Jorge work to extinguish the flames, their teamwork seamless despite the tension hanging over them. As the fire dies down, Hector approaches Mateo, his voice choked with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Mateo places a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Take care of your family. That's all that matters." But as Mateo turns away, he notices a figure watching from the shadows of a nearby alley. The man's posture is too casual, his eyes too calculating. Mateo's gut tells him he's Cartel, a silent warning. That evening, Mateo returns to the station, his mind racing. Rosa and Jorge join him in the office, their expressions weary but determined. "This wasn't any accident," Rosa says. "The bakery fire. It was a message." "They're trying to scare us," Jorge adds, "and it's working." Mateo leans back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Fear is their weapon, but it's also their weakness. People make mistakes when they're afraid. Rosa frowns. "What are you saying?" "We stay vigilant. We watch their movements. They think they're untouchable, but no one is." As the night deepens, Mateo finds himself alone in the station's garage, inspecting the fire truck. His hands move mechanically, but his thoughts are elsewhere. Memories of his Navy SEAL days surface unbidden, missions in hostile territories, the camaraderie of his team, and the weight of decisions that left scars both visible and hidden. The sound of footsteps pulls him back to the present. He turns to see Jorge standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" Jorge asks, handing him a cup. Mateo shakes his head. "Too much to think about." Jorge hesitates before speaking. "Mateo, you've always been the strongest of us. But it's different. We're fighting an enemy that doesn't play by any rules." "That's why we have to be smarter," Mateo replies. "They want us to react, to make mistakes. We can't give them that." Jorge nods, though doubt lingers in his eyes. "Just promise me one thing. Don't try to take this on alone." Mateo offers a faint smile. "We're a team. We face this together." The following morning, the cartel escalates. Flyers appear throughout the town, each bearing the same chilling message: pay or burn. The townspeople's fear deepens, but so does their resolve. Quietly, they begin to organize, sharing information and resources. Whispers of resistance spread, though no one dares speak openly. Mateo watches from the sidelines, his heart heavy, but his mind resolute. He knows the road ahead will be dangerous, but he also knows that the cartel has underestimated this town, and they've underestimated him. As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the mountains, Mateo sits at his desk, sketching a rough map of the town. He marks key locations: the fire station, vulnerable businesses, potential choke points. The plan is forming piece by piece. This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a fight to take back their home. The rumble of distant thunder echoed through the mountain valley as rain began to patter softly against the rooftops of the quiet town. Mateo stood alone in his modest living room, staring at a faded photograph on the mantel. In the photo, a younger version of himself, dressed in full Navy SEAL gear, stood amidst his team. The smiles were faint, the weight of their missions evident even then. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside him. His reflection was broken by the sudden crackle of the town's emergency radio. A panicked voice broke through. "This is Cruzado Market. We need help. They're here." Static drowned the rest of the message. Without hesitation, Mateo grabbed his coat and headed to the fire station. By the time he arrived, his crew was huddled together, their faces pale with fear. The station's large bay door stood partially open, revealing the damage from the recent vandalism. "They hit Cruzado," one of his men said, his voice trembling. Mateo nodded, his expression steely. "Then we do what we're trained to do. Prepare the truck." The fire truck rolled out moments later, its sirens piercing through the stormy night. As they neared the market, the damage became apparent. Flames licked the edges of the storefront, and a group of frightened townspeople huddled in the shadows, hesitant to approach. Mateo leaped from the truck before it came to a full stop, barking orders to his team. "Get the hoses ready. Make sure everyone's safe." As they worked to control the blaze, Mateo caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure retreating into the alley behind the market. He motioned for one of his crew to take over before slipping into the darkness. The alley reeked of gasoline, and faint footprints in the mud led him to a discarded gas can. He crouched, his hand brushing over the can's surface. Nearby he found a lighter bearing the cartel's emblem, a snake coiled around a jagged dagger. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps behind him snapped Mateo's attention forward. He spun just in time to see a man charging at him with a knife. Mateo sidestepped, the attack with precision, using the assailant's momentum against him. A swift elbow to the back of the head sent the man crumpling to the ground. "Who sent you?" Mateo growled, pinning the man's arm. The attacker spat, his expression defiant. "You think you can stop us? Cruz owns this town." Mateo didn't respond, his focus shifting to the sound of sirens approaching. The police were arriving, late as usual. He released the man, who scrambled to his feet and disappeared into the night. Back at the station, the crew worked in silence, repairing the damage to the fire truck. The mood was heavy, the weight of the cartel's presence palpable. Mateo stood apart from the group, lost in thought. One of his crew, a young man named Joaquin, finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you let the police handle it?" Mateo turned to face him, his gaze steady. "Because they won't. This is our town, and it's our responsibility to protect it." The room fell silent again, but this time it was filled with a quiet resolve. Later that night, Mateo sat on the edge of his bed, the lighter turning over and over in his hands. His mind drifted to a memory he'd tried to bury. The flashback was vivid. Mateo and his SEAL team were deep in enemy territory, tasked with extracting a hostage from a fortified compound. Every movement was calculated, every breath deliberate. The mission had been successful, but the cost was heavy. A close friend and teammate, Jackson, had been critically wounded during the extraction. As the helicopter lifted them to safety, Mateo held Jackson's hand, promising him they'd make it back together. Jackson's grip loosened, his eyes closing. For the last time, the memory faded, but the pain lingered. Mateo clenched the lighter in his fist, his jaw tightening. The next morning, news of the Cruzado market fire spread through the town like wildfire. Fear and anger bubbled beneath the surface, with whispers of the cartel's growing aggression dominating every conversation. Mateo visited the market owner, a middle-aged woman named Sophia. She was sweeping the charred remains of her storefront, tears streaking her soot-covered face. "I'm sorry this happened," Mateo said gently. Sophia looked up, her expression a mix of gratitude and despair. "They said this would happen if I didn't pay. I thought they'd leave us alone after the fire." "They won't," Mateo said, his voice firm, "but they will regret underestimating us." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Mateo gathered his crew at the fire station. He stood before them, his presence commanding yet calm. "I know you're scared," he began, "and you have every right to be. The cartel thrives on fear. But if we let that fear control us, they win. We can't let that happen." One of the older crew members, a man named Carlos, stepped forward. "What can we do? We're firefighters, not soldiers." Mateo's gaze hardened. "You're more than that. You're protectors, guardians of this community, and together we can make a difference." The room was silent for a moment before Joaquin spoke up. "What do you need from us?" "Courage," Mateo replied, And trust. I'll handle the rest." In the days that followed, Mateo began his covert preparations. He studied the cartel's movements, piecing together their operations through observations and subtle inquiries. At night, he trained alone, sharpening the skills he thought he'd left behind. His first target was a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. Rumored to be a hub for the cartel's drug operations, it was heavily guarded but poorly secured. Under the cover of darkness, Mateo slipped through the shadows, his movements silent and deliberate. He disabled the guards with precision, ensuring they were incapacitated without drawing attention. Once inside, he planted small charges in key areas, careful to avoid unnecessary destruction. As he exited the warehouse, he detonated the charges remotely. The explosion was controlled but effective, reducing the cartel's supplies to ashes. The cartel's response was swift. Alejandro Cruz, furious over the attack, called an emergency meeting with his top lieutenants. "This man thinks he can challenge us," Alejandro snarled, slamming his fist on the table. "Find him! Make an example of him!" Hector, Alejandro's second-in-command, frowned. This wasn't an amateur. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Alejandro's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll show them they've made a mistake." Back in town, the atmosphere began to shift. Though fear still lingered, whispers of Mateo's actions spread hope among the townspeople. Small acts of defiance began to emerge, a shopkeeper refusing to pay the cartel, a mechanic deliberately delaying repairs on their vehicles. Mateo watched from a distance, his resolve strengthening with each act of resistance. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but Mateo was ready. Mateo stood at the edge of a dense forest overlooking the small town. The faint glow of lanterns in the distance contrasted with the shadowy outlines of the mountains. His mind raced as he replayed the cartel's most recent attack, the injuries they had inflicted on his team, and the growing fear in the eyes of the townspeople. Diego emerged from behind the fire truck, his grease-stained hands clutching a worn duffel bag. "Got everything you asked for," he said, setting it down with a heavy thud. Inside were tools of preparation, maps, flashlights, rope, and a few items Mateo had specifically requested. "Gracias," Mateo replied, his voice calm but firm. He opened the bag and began organizing its contents on the truck's tailgate. "I need to know everything you've heard about their operations. Locations, routines, weaknesses." Diego hesitated, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "You're serious about this? Going after them?" Mateo's eyes met Diego's. "They left us no choice. This town won't survive if we let them tighten their grip." Word traveled quickly. In a small town, and Mateo's quiet resolve had sparked whispers of defiance. At a secluded barn on the outskirts, he met with a group of locals who had been watching the cartel's movements. Among them was Rosa, a young school teacher with a fiery determination, and Felipe, an elderly farmer who had lived through similar conflicts in his youth. "They've been using the old mill outside of town as a supply depot," Rosa explained, pointing to a hand-drawn map spread across a hay bale. "Trucks come and go late at night, always heavily guarded." Felipe nodded. "But they're not invincible. They've gotten careless, thinking no one would dare challenge them." Mateo studied the map intently. "We'll start with intel, no action until we're certain. If we're going to strike, it has to be precise. No room for error." Posters bearing Mateo's likeness appeared overnight, nailed to walls and fences. The cartel had placed a bounty on him, a bold warning to the town. In the fire station, his crew gathered around one of the posters, their faces pale with fear. "This is serious, Mateo," Luis, his second-in-command, said. "They're not just after you. They'll come for all of us." Mateo tore the poster off the wall and crumpled it in his fist. "They want us scared. Don't give them that power. Focus on the work. If we stay united, we can protect this town." Despite his words, the weight of the bounty was undeniable. Mateo knew it was only a matter of time before someone tried to collect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mateo found himself at the cemetery, standing before his mother's grave. The cool mountain air carried the scent of pine and earth, grounding him as he knelt and placed a hand on the weathered stone. "Mama," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I've tried so hard to leave that life behind, to be the man you wanted me to be, but they're forcing my hand. This town needs me." The silence was his only answer, but in it Mateo found a measure of clarity. He rose, his resolve hardening like steel. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." Back at the fire station, Mateo worked late into the night, sketching out plans and marking key locations on a map. Diego leaned against a wall, arms crossed, watching him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're not just a firefighter," Diego said at last. "Whatever you're planning, it's not the kind of thing regular folks do." Mateo paused, his pencil hovering over the map. "I learned a lot in my old life, things I'd hoped I'd never need to use again. But if I can use them to keep this town safe, then it's worth it." Diego nodded slowly. "Well, you've got my help, whatever you need." Over the next few days, Mateo's network grew. Townspeople who had once been too afraid to speak out now came forward with tips and information. They moved carefully, avoiding suspicion, but their determination was palpable. The town was waking up, and Mateo was at the center of its awakening. By the end of Act 4, Mateo had taken his first steps toward confronting the cartel head-on. The seeds of resistance had been planted, and while the road ahead was fraught with danger, the spark of hope burned brighter than ever. Mateo moved through the shadows, his footsteps silent against the dirt path leading to the outskirts of town. The old mill came into view, a hulking silhouette against the faint glow of moonlight. He had spent days scouting the location, observing the cartel's movements, memorizing their routines. Tonight, he'd confirm the intel Rosa and Felipe had provided and assess the risks for what was to come. The mill's perimeter was guarded by 2 men, each armed with assault rifles. They stood lazily at their posts, chatting in low voices and occasionally glancing at their phones. Mateo crouched behind a cluster of bushes, his breathing steady as he surveyed the scene. Years of training came back to him effortlessly, the instincts he had tried to bury now his greatest weapon. Timing his movements with the guards' distracted patrols, Mateo slipped closer, staying low and blending into the shadows. From his vantage point, he spotted a truck being loaded with crates. 2 more men worked under the dim light of a hanging bulb, their voices carrying faintly in the still night. Another shipment, Mateo thought. Probably weapons or drugs. He committed the details to memory: license plates, the positioning of the guards, the layout of the area. A sudden sound broke the quiet, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Mateo froze, his hand instinctively moving to the knife strapped to his side. One of the guards had wandered closer, lighting a cigarette. The glow from the lighter briefly illuminated his face, a man in his 30s with a scar running down his cheek. Mateo stayed perfectly still, his body coiled like a spring, until the guard turned and walked back to his post. Satisfied with the night's observations, Mateo began his retreat. He moved as carefully as he had arrived, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't followed. By the time he reached the fire station, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. Diego was waiting for him, leaning against the side of the truck with a steaming cup of coffee. "Anything?" Diego asked, his voice low. Mateo nodded, removing a small notebook from his pocket and flipping it open. "They're using the mill as a distribution hub. 2 guards outside, 2 more loading the truck. They're complacent, but not careless. We'll need to hit them hard and fast when the time comes." Diego took a sip of coffee, his brow furrowing. "And when will that be?" "Soon," Mateo said, closing the notebook. "But first, we need to disrupt their supply chain. If we can cut off their resources, we'll weaken their hold on the town." Diego nodded, his expression serious. "I'll start prepping the gear. Just say the word." Later that day, Mateo gathered his crew and the growing group of townspeople. willing to stand against the cartel. Rosa and Felipe were there, along with a few others who had proven themselves trustworthy. They met in the same barn, the map of the town spread out before them. "We'll target the mill first," Mateo said, pointing to its location on the map. "It's their main hub for distribution. If we can take it out, they'll have to regroup. And that buys us time. But we'll need to move quickly and leave no trace." Felipe raised a hand, his weathered face creased with concern. "And what happens when they retaliate?" "Because they will, Mateo. They'll come back harder." "Then we'll be ready," Mateo replied firmly. "This isn't just about fighting back. It's about showing them we won't be intimidated. Every step we take weakens them and strengthens us." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Rosa broke the quiet, her voice steady. "I'm in, whatever it takes." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Mateo looked around the room, seeing the determination in their faces. It wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs. Together, they were a force the cartel hadn't anticipated. As the sun set once more, preparations were underway. Diego worked on modifying a truck for the operation, reinforcing its frame, and installing compartments to hide supplies. Rosa compiled lists of volunteers willing to act as lookouts. Felipe coordinated the sharing of resources among the townspeople, ensuring no one was left vulnerable. In the quiet moments between planning, Mateo took a moment to reflect. He stood on the station's roof, looking out over the town he had come to love. The mountains loomed in the distance, a reminder of both the isolation and the resilience of this place. He thought of his mother, of her belief in doing what was right, no matter the cost. "We're ready for you, Alejandro," he murmured into the night. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, Mateo felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but he knew they had taken another step toward reclaiming their town. The next day began with a tense, focused energy as Mateo coordinated with his growing network of allies. The fire station had become an unlikely hub of resistance, its walls echoing with quiet conversations and plans whispered over maps and diagrams. Every move had to be calculated, every step executed with precision. The lives of the townspeople depended on it. Mateo stood at a makeshift table in the engine bay, his hand resting on a detailed map of the surrounding area. Diego, Rosa, Felipe, and several other trusted allies gathered around him, listening intently as he outlined the plan for their next strike. The old mill, now confirmed as the cartel's primary supply hub, was their target. It was both a symbol of the cartel's power and a critical node in their operations. Disrupting it would send a message and buy the town more time to prepare. "We'll approach from the west," Mateo said, tracing a path through the forest with his finger. "It's the least guarded side, and the tree cover will keep us out of sight." "Diego, you'll drive the truck here," he pointed to a clearing just beyond the mill, "and wait for us. We'll load what we can and disable the rest." "And if they spot us?" Rosa asked, her voice steady, but laced with concern. Mateo met her gaze. "We're in and out before they have a chance to react. If things go south, we retreat. This isn't a fight we can win head-on. Not yet." Felipe nodded, his weathered face resolute. "We'll do what needs to be done. But we need to be careful. The cartel doesn't take embarrassment lightly." The group dispersed to prepare, each member carrying the weight of the mission in their own way. Diego worked on the truck, ensuring it was ready for the task ahead. Rosa organized supplies and briefed the lookouts who would keep watch from strategic points around the town. Mateo, meanwhile, reviewed the plan again and again, searching for any flaws that could jeopardize their success. As night fell, the team assembled in the fire station's yard. The air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that amplifies every sound. Mateo looked at each of them, his expression calm but serious. "We've prepared for this," he said. "Stick to the plan, trust each other, and we'll make it through. This town is counting on us." With that, they moved out, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth as they made their way through the forest. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Mateo took point, his senses sharp, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. The mill came into view, its imposing structure silhouetted against the night sky. The group paused, crouching low as they surveyed the area. Just as Mateo had observed during his earlier reconnaissance, 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements lazy and predictable. The sound of muffled voices and the occasional clatter of metal came from within, evidence of the work being done under cover of darkness. Mateo signaled for the group to split up. Rosa and Felipe moved to the left, skirting the edge of the clearing to position themselves near the loading area. Diego stayed back with the truck, the engine off, but ready to roar to life at a moment's notice. Mateo and a young mechanic named Javier took the right, their path leading them to a side entrance. The first phase of the plan went smoothly. Rosa and Felipe disabled the truck parked near the loading dock, puncturing its tires and cutting the fuel line. Mateo and Javier slipped inside the mill, moving silently through the shadows. The interior was a chaotic maze of crates, machinery, and half-finished projects. Mateo motioned for Javier to stay close, his eyes scanning the room for anything of value or danger. They found what they were looking for in a corner of the mill, several crates filled with weapons and ammunition. Mateo's heart quickened. This was a major find, the kind of cash that could tip the balance of power in the town's favor. He quickly assessed the situation, noting the positions of the guards and the best routes for extraction. Signaling to Javier, Mateo began opening the crates and selecting the most portable items. They worked quickly but carefully, mindful of the noise. Outside, Rosa and Felipe kept watch, their eyes darting between the forest and the mill. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves a potential threat, just as they were loading. The last of the weapons into their packs, a shout rang out. One of the guards had spotted Rosa and Felipe near the disabled truck. Mateo's head snapped up at the sound, his mind racing. He motioned for Javier to stay hidden and moved toward the commotion. The guard was approaching Rosa and Felipe, his rifle raised. Rosa stepped forward, her hands up in a gesture of surrender, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "We're just passing through," she said, her voice steady. "Didn't mean to trespass." The guard sneered, clearly unconvinced. "You think I'm stupid? No one just passes through here." He stepped closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. Before he could react, Mateo emerged from the shadows, moving with the speed and precision of his SEAL training. In an instant, he had the guard disarmed and unconscious on the ground. The entire exchange took less than 5 seconds. "Move!" Mateo hissed, motioning for Rosa and Felipe to follow him. The noise had alerted the other guards, and shouts echoed through the mill as they realized something was wrong. The group regrouped at the truck, their movements urgent but controlled. Diego started the engine as Mateo and the others piled in, the stolen weapons secured in the back. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them as the remaining guards opened fire, their bullets thudding into the trees and kicking up dirt. Diego floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward and tearing down the forest path. Mateo kept watch out the back, his rifle at the ready, but the cartel's guards didn't pursue. By the time they reached the town, the adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by the grim reality of what they had just done. Back at the fire station, the group unloaded the weapons and took stock of their haul. The mood was tense but triumphant. They had struck a blow against the cartel, but the risks were higher than ever. Mateo knew it was only a matter of time before Alejandro. Crews responded, and the retaliation would be swift and brutal. "This is just the beginning," Mateo said, addressing the group. "They'll come after us harder now, but we're ready. We've shown them we're not afraid, and we'll keep fighting until they're gone." The group dispersed, each person carrying their share of the weapons to hidden caches around the town. Mateo stayed behind, his mind already racing with plans for their next move. The cartel's grip was weakening, but the fight was far from over. In the quiet hours of the night, Mateo sat alone in the fire station's engine bay, his thoughts drifting to his mother. He pulled out a small, worn photo from his pocket, the edges frayed from years of handling. It showed a younger version of himself, standing proudly in his Navy SEAL uniform, his mother beaming beside him. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered. "For this town. For everyone who can't fight back." The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Diego appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "We did good tonight," Diego said, leaning against the wall. "But you know this isn't over. They'll come back with everything they have." Mateo nodded. "I know, but we're ready. We have to be." Diego studied him for a moment before nodding. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day." As Diego left, Mateo remained where he was, staring at the photo in his hand. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The fight for the town's future had only just begun. The early morning air was thick with tension as Mateo stood at the edge of the town square, his eyes scanning the faces of the townspeople who had gathered. Word of the plan to strike at the cartel's supply hub had spread quietly but effectively, and now the small group of volunteers was assembled, ready to fight for their home. Some held tools, wrenches, hammers, even farming implements, while others carried makeshift weapons cobbled together from hunting gear and old scrap. Fear lingered in their eyes, but beneath it was a spark of defiance, a collective fire that Mateo had never seen burn so brightly in them before. He could see them steeling themselves, exchanging nods and murmured words of reassurance. A young man clutched a crowbar so tightly that his knuckles whitened, while an elderly woman, her face lined with years of hardship, held an old rifle like a badge of honor, her gaze unwavering. Mateo stepped forward, his presence commanding but calm. "I know many of you are scared. You have every right to be. The cartel has tried to make us believe they're untouchable, that resisting them is impossible. But they're wrong. They rely on fear to control us, and today we're going to show them we won't be controlled." He paused, letting his words settle over the group. Rosa stood at his side, her expression fierce and unwavering. "This isn't just about one attack," she added. "It's about sending a message, to them and to ourselves. We are not helpless." Her words brought a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. A young girl, barely out of her teens, raised her hand. "Do you really think we can do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rosa's gaze softened as she stepped closer. "I know we can," she said firmly, "but it starts with us believing it." Diego approached with a clipboard, his grease-streaked hands clutching it tightly. "Vehicles are ready. We've got 2 trucks and a van, all reinforced. Supplies are loaded, and the routes are mapped out." Mateo nodded. "Good. Everyone knows their roles. Stick to the plan, stay alert, and watch each other's backs. We move as one." The group dispersed, heading to their designated vehicles. Mateo climbed into the lead truck, with Diego behind the wheel and Felipe in the passenger seat. As the engine roared to life, he glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of Rosa organizing her own team in the van behind them. The sight filled him with a sense of resolve. They were ready. The convoy approached the outskirts of the old mill under the cover of darkness. Mateo's scouting had revealed a clear pattern to the cartel's movements, and tonight was no exception. The guards were posted at the usual spots, their routine unchanged. The glow of the hanging bulb near the loading area cast long shadows across the ground, occasionally disrupted by the guards' restless pacing. One of them lit a cigarette, the orange ember momentarily illuminating his face before it was swallowed again by the night. Mateo signaled for the vehicles to stop a safe distance away. The group disembarked silently, moving into the positions they had rehearsed. Rosa and her team flanked the west side of the mill, while Felipe led a smaller group to the east. Mateo remained at the center, his focus sharp as he observed the scene. Diego handed him a pair of binoculars. 2 guards by the main entrance, same as before. No new faces. "They're getting complacent," Mateo murmured. "That'll be their mistake." He raised his hand, signaling the first phase of the operation. Rosa's team moved in silently, cutting the power lines that fed the mill. The hanging bulb flickered and went dark, plunging the area into shadows. Confused voices rose from the guards as they fumbled for flashlights. The sound of snapping twigs and distant rustling carried faintly through the night, further unsettling them. Mateo gave the second signal. Felipe's group launched a diversion, setting off a small explosion near the east perimeter. It wasn't enough to cause significant damage, but it created the chaos they needed. The guards abandoned their posts, rushing toward the sound. Their shouted orders betraying their panic. "Move!" Mateo ordered. The main team surged forward, slipping into the mill through the unguarded entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and sawdust. Crates were stacked high against the walls, marked with coded labels that Mateo recognized from his reconnaissance. Drugs, weapons, money, the lifeblood of the cartel's operations. A faint dripping noise echoed from somewhere deeper in the mill, adding an eerie undertone to their hurried work. Diego and a few others began rigging the crates with small charges Mateo had prepared. "Set them to go off in 5 minutes," Mateo instructed. "We need enough time to get clear." As they worked, the sound of shouting echoed from outside. The guards had realized the diversion and were regrouping. Mateo's pulse quickened, but his focus remained steady. "Rosa, status," he whispered into the radio. "We've got eyes on the guards," her voice crackled back. "They're circling toward the north side. We'll hold them off." "Be careful," Mateo replied. The charges were set, and the team began their retreat. Mateo stayed at the rear, ensuring everyone made it out safely. As they exited the mill, he caught a glimpse of Rosa's group engaging the guards in the distance. They used hit-and-run tactics, keeping the cartel off balance and buying precious time. Rosa's figure was a blur of motion, her team's movements, sharp and precise, a testament to the hours of preparation they had put in. A sudden burst of gunfire rang out, and Mateo's heart sank. He turned toward the sound, his instincts screaming at him to intervene. But he knew his priority was the mission. "Fall back to the vehicles," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team regrouped at the convoy, and Mateo counted, heads his chest tightening until he saw Rosa among them. She was out of breath but uninjured, her eyes blazing with adrenaline. "We're clear," she said. Mateo nodded, relief washing over him. "Let's move." As the convoy sped away, the explosion lit up the night sky behind them. The mill was engulfed in flames, the cartel's supply hub reduced to rubble. Cheers erupted from the group, a cathartic release of the tension that had gripped them. Mateo allowed himself a small smile, but it was fleeting. He knew this was only the beginning. Back in town, the mood was a mixture of triumph and apprehension. Word of the successful strike spread quickly, and for the first time in months, the townspeople felt a glimmer of hope. Neighbors exchanged smiles and children whispered excitedly, their laughter breaking through the grim silence that had hung over the town for so long. But Mateo remained cautious. The cartel would retaliate. He was certain of that. Diego approached him as he stood by the fire station, staring out at the quiet streets. "We did good tonight," Diego said, "but I'm guessing you're already thinking about what comes next." Mateo nodded. "They'll come back harder. We need to be ready." "The people are with you," Diego said. "You've given them something to believe in." Mateo glanced at Diego, his expression somber. "Belief isn't enough. We need to stay smart, stay ahead of them. This isn't over." Diego placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder. "You've got us. We'll see this through." In the days that followed, the cartel's response was swift and brutal. Alejandro Cruz, furious at the loss of the mill, sent a wave of enforcers into the town. They targeted businesses, homes, and anyone suspected of aiding Mateo. Fear began to creep back into the community, but Mateo refused to let it take hold. He worked tirelessly, coordinating patrols and fortifying key locations. He trained volunteers in basic self-defense, teaching them how to protect themselves and each other. Rosa took charge of organizing a communication network, ensuring that no one was left isolated. One evening, as Mateo reviewed plans with Diego and Rosa, a messenger arrived with a folded piece of paper. Mateo unfolded it, his jaw tightening, as he read the words scrawled in bold letters. "We know where you are. Surrender, or everyone pays the price." Rosa's eyes widened. "What do we do?" Mateo's expression was steely. "We don't give in. They want us scared, scattered. We stay united, and we keep fighting." Diego leaned forward. "What's the next move?" Mateo's gaze hardened. "We hit them where it hurts. Their leadership. If we can destabilize Alejandro's command, the rest will crumble." The room fell, silent as the weight of his words settled over them. The fight was far from over, but Mateo's resolve was unshaken. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through, for the town, for his team, and for the chance to finally live free of fear. The early morning air was thick with tension as Mateo stood at the edge of the town square, his eyes scanning the faces of the townspeople who had gathered. Word of the plan to strike at the cartel's supply hub had spread quietly but effectively, and now the small group of volunteers was assembled, ready to fight for their home. Some held tools, wrenches, hammers, even farming implements, while others carried makeshift weapons cobbled together from hunting gear and old scrap. Fear lingered in their eyes, but beneath it was a spark of defiance, a collective fire that Mateo had never seen burn so brightly in them before. He could see them steeling themselves, exchanging nods and murmured words of reassurance. A young man clutched a crowbar so tightly that his knuckles whitened, while an elderly woman, her face lined with years of hardship, held an old rifle like a badge of honor, her gaze unwavering. Mateo stepped forward, his presence commanding, but calm. "I know many of you are scared. You have every right to be. The cartel has tried to make us believe they're untouchable, that resisting them is impossible. But they're wrong. They rely on fear to control us, and today we're going to show them we won't be controlled." He paused, letting his words settle over the group. Rosa stood at his side, her expression fierce and unwavering. "This isn't just about one attack," she added. "It's about sending a message, to them and to ourselves. We are not helpless." Her words brought a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. A young girl, barely out of her teens, raised her hand. "Do you really think we can do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rosa's gaze softened as she stepped closer. "I know we can," she said firmly, "but it starts with us believing it." Diego approached with a clipboard, his grease-streaked hands clutching it tightly. "Vehicles are ready. We've got 2 trucks and a van, all reinforced. Supplies are loaded, and the routes are mapped out." Mateo nodded. "Good. Everyone knows their roles. Stick to the plan, stay alert, and watch each other's backs. We move as one." The group dispersed, heading to their designated vehicles. Mateo climbed into the lead truck, with Diego behind the wheel and Felipe in the passenger seat. As the engine roared to life, he glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of Rosa organizing her own team in the van behind them. The sight filled him with a sense of resolve. They were ready. The convoy approached the outskirts of the old mill under the cover of darkness. Mateo's scouting had revealed a clear pattern to the cartel's movements, and tonight was no exception. The guards were posted at the usual spots, their routine unchanged. The glow of the hanging bulb near the loading area cast long shadows across the ground, occasionally disrupted by the guards' restless pacing. One of them lit a cigarette, the orange ember momentarily illuminating his face before it was swallowed again by the night. Mateo signaled for the vehicles to stop a safe distance away. The group disembarked silently, moving into the positions. They had rehearsed. Rosa and her team flanked the west side of the mill, while Felipe led a smaller group to the east. Mateo remained at the center, his focus sharp as he observed the scene. Diego handed him a pair of binoculars. 2 guards by the main entrance, same as before. No new faces. "They're getting complacent," Mateo murmured. "That'll Be their mistake. He raised his hand, signaling the first phase of the operation. Rosa's team moved in silently, cutting the power lines that fed the mill. The hanging bulb flickered and went dark, plunging the area into shadows. Confused voices rose from the guards as they fumbled for flashlights. The sound of snapping twigs and distant rustling carried faintly through the night, further unsettling them. Mateo gave the second signal. Felipe's group launched a diversion, setting off a small explosion near the east perimeter. It wasn't enough to cause significant damage, but it created the chaos they needed. The guards abandoned their posts, rushing toward the sound. Their shouted orders betraying their panic. "Move," Mateo ordered. The main team surged forward, slipping into the mill through the unguarded entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and sawdust. Crates were stacked high against the walls, marked with coded labels that Mateo recognized from his reconnaissance. Drugs, weapons, money, the lifeblood of the cartel's operations. A faint dripping noise echoed from somewhere deeper in the mill, adding an eerie undertone to their hurried work. Diego and a few others began rigging the crates with small charges Mateo had prepared. "Set them to go off in 5 minutes," Mateo instructed. "We need enough time to get clear." As they worked, the sound of shouting echoed from outside. The guards had realized the diversion and were regrouping. Mateo's pulse quickened, but his focus remained steady. "Rosa, status?" he whispered into the radio. "We've got eyes on the guards," her voice crackled back. "They're circling toward the north side. We'll hold them off." "Be careful," Mateo replied. The charges were set, and the team began their retreat. Mateo stayed at the rear, ensuring everyone made it out safely. As they exited the mill, he caught a glimpse of Rosa's group engaging the guards in the place distance. They used hit-and-run tactics, keeping the cartel off balance and buying precious time. Rosa's figure was a blur of motion, her team's movements sharp and precise, a testament to the hours of preparation they had put in. A sudden burst of gunfire rang out, and Mateo's heart sank. He turned toward the sound, his instincts screaming at him to intervene, but he knew his priority was the mission. "Fall back to the vehicles," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team regrouped at the convoy, and Mateo counted heads, his chest tightening, until he saw Rosa among them. She was out of breath but uninjured, her eyes blazing with adrenaline. "We're clear," she said. Mateo nodded, relief washing over him. "Let's move." As the convoy sped away, the explosion lit up the night sky behind them. The mill was engulfed in flames, the cartel's supply hub reduced to rubble. Cheers erupted from the group, a cathartic release of the tension that had gripped them. Mateo allowed himself a small smile, but it was fleeting. He knew this was only the beginning. Back in town, the mood was a mixture of triumph and apprehension. Word of the successful strike spread quickly, and for the first time in months, the townspeople felt a glimmer of hope. Neighbors exchanged smiles, and children whispered excitedly, their laughter breaking through the grim silence that had hung over the town for so long. But Mateo remained cautious. The cartel would retaliate. He was certain of that. Diego approached him as he stood by the fire station, staring out at the quiet streets. "We did good tonight," Diego said, "but I'm guessing you're already thinking about what comes next." Mateo nodded. "They'll come back harder. We need to be ready." "The people are with you," Diego said. "You've given them something to believe in." Mateo glanced at Diego, his expression somber. "Belief isn't enough. We need to stay smart, stay ahead of them. This isn't over." Diego placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder. "You've got us. We'll see this through." In the days that followed, the cartel's response was swift and brutal. Alejandro Cruz, furious at the loss of the mill, sent a wave of enforcers into the town. They targeted businesses, homes, and anyone suspected of aiding Mateo. Fear began to creep back into the community, but Mateo refused to let it take hold. He worked tirelessly, coordinating patrols and fortifying key locations. He trained volunteers in basic self-defense, teaching them how to protect themselves and each other. Rosa took charge of organizing a communication network, ensuring that no one was left isolated. One evening, as Mateo reviewed plans with Diego and Rosa, a messenger arrived with a folded piece of paper. Mateo unfolded it, his jaw tightening, as he read the words scrawled in bold letters. "We know where you are. Surrender, or everyone pays the price." Rosa's eyes widened. "What do we do?" Mateo's expression was steely. "We don't give in. They want us scared, scattered. We stay united, and we keep fighting." Diego leaned forward. "What's the next move?" Mateo's gaze hardened. "We hit them where it hurts, their leadership. If we can destabilize Alejandro's command, the rest will crumble." The room fell silent, as the weight of his words settled over them. The fight was far from over, but Mateo's resolve was unshaken. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through, for the town, for his team, and for the chance to finally live free of fear. The night was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that carried an undertone of foreboding. Mateo stood on the roof of the fire station, scanning the town below. The moonlight illuminated the streets in a pale glow, but shadows clung to the edges, where danger was most likely to creep in. Behind him, Diego climbed the ladder, bringing 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use this," Diego said, handing one to Mateo. Mateo took the cup but didn't drink, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They're watching us," he said, "waiting for us to make a mistake." Diego leaned on the rooftop's railing. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" "No." "Not yet," Mateo replied. "They're regrouping, planning their next move. Cruz won't make the same mistake twice. He'll come for us directly." Diego's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we make sure we're ready when he does." Below, the town was restless. Inside homes, families prepared for the worst, barricading windows and stockpiling food. Volunteers patrolled the streets in shifts, their makeshift weapons ready in case of an attack. Rosa was leading one of the patrols, her flashlight sweeping over doorways and alleyways. Her presence had become a source of comfort to many, her calm determination infectious. As Mateo descended from the roof, he found Felipe waiting for him in the station's office. The older man had a map spread out on the desk, marked with red, circles and notes scribbled in pencil. "I've been thinking about what you said," Felipe began, "about hitting their leadership. If we're serious about this, we need to take out Cruz's stronghold." Mateo studied the map, his finger, tracing the red circle labeled La Colina Estate. It was a sprawling compound nestled deep in the hills, heavily guarded and nearly impenetrable. "It won't be easy," Mateo said. "We'll need better intel and more firepower. But if we take the fight to Cruz, it could change everything." Felipe nodded. "I've been asking around. Some of the old miners know the terrain up there. They say there are tunnels that run beneath the estate, old escape routes from the Revolution days. If we can find a way in..." Mateo's mind raced. "We'll need to confirm it, send someone to scout the area, someone who knows how to stay unseen." Felipe hesitated. "I'll go. I'm not as quick as I used to be, but I know the land. And Cruz's men wouldn't suspect someone like me." Mateo placed a hand on Felipe's shoulder. "Thank you. But take Rosa with you. 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. Felipe agreed, and plans were set in motion. Rosa and Felipe would leave at dawn, slipping out before the cartel's enforcers could spot them. In the meantime, the rest of the group would fortify the town and prepare for whatever retaliation might come. The following morning, Mateo watched as Rosa and Felipe disappeared into the dense forest that bordered the town. He hated sending them into danger, but he knew it was necessary. Cruz's compound was the key to dismantling the cartel's operations, and the tunnels could give them the advantage they desperately needed. Back in town, Diego oversaw the reinforcement of key locations. Metal sheets were welded over vulnerable windows, and trenches were dug along the main road to slow any advancing vehicles. Volunteers practiced drills under Mateo's guidance, learning how to respond to different attack scenarios. Every movement, every decision was fueled by the knowledge that the cartel's retaliation would be swift and merciless. By nightfall, tension hung heavy in the air. The patrols were doubled and Mateo found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the quiet streets, his thoughts drifting to Rosa and Felipe. He prayed they were safe, that their mission would yield the answers they needed. Hours passed, and just before dawn, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. Mateo turned to see Rosa and Felipe approaching the fire station, their faces pale but determined. "We found it," Rosa said breathlessly. "The tunnels are real, they're narrow and unstable, but they lead straight to the estate storage wing." Felipe nodded, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "They've got guards posted at the main entrances, but no one's watching the old tunnels. If we move quickly, we can get in and out before they know what hit them." Mateo's mind shifted into high gear. The opportunity was there, but it came with risks. He gathered the group in the fire station's main hall, laying out the map and explaining the plan. "This is our chance," he said, his voice firm. "We hit the estate, take out their supplies, and cut off Cruz's resources. But we need to move carefully. One mistake, and it's over." The group listened intently, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. Rosa detailed the layout of the tunnels, marking the weak points and potential exits. Diego prepared the equipment, ensuring they had enough explosives to destroy the cartel's stockpile without bringing the entire estate down on their heads. As the sun began to rise, the group set out, their footsteps silent as they slipped into the forest. Mateo led the way, his senses sharp, every instinct honed from years of experience. The path to the tunnels was treacherous, overgrown with roots and littered with debris, but they pressed on. When they reached the entrance, a narrow opening, hidden. Behind a cluster of boulders, Mateo turned to the group. "This is it," he said. "Stay close, stay quiet, and trust each other. We'll make it through." One by one, they entered the tunnels, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was damp and suffocating, the walls pressing in on either side. Mateo took the lead, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Every step echoed, a reminder of how precarious their mission was. After what felt like hours, they reached the end of the tunnel. Faint light seeped through the cracks in the wall ahead, and Mateo signaled for the group to stop. He peered through a small opening, his heart pounding as he saw the storage wing of the estate. Crates upon crates of weapons and supplies were stacked high, guarded by only a handful of men. Mateo turned to Rosa and Diego. "We set the charges here and here," he whispered, pointing to the structural supports. "Once they're in place, we fall back. No heroics." The group moved with practiced efficiency, placing the explosives and retreating into the shadows. Mateo's heart raced as he counted down the seconds, every muscle in his body tensed for the inevitable chaos. When the explosives detonated, the ground shook and the air filled with dust and debris. Shouts rang out as the guards scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The storage wing was obliterated, and the group was already retreating through the tunnels, their mission a success. Back in the forest, Mateo allowed himself a moment of relief as the group emerged into the open air. The estate's supplies were gone, and Cruz's operation had taken a devastating blow. But as they made their way back to town, Mateo knew the fight was far from over. Cruz would retaliate, and the next battle would be even harder. "We've bought ourselves time," Mateo said to the group, "but we need to use it wisely. This is just the beginning." The group nodded, their faces set with determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had proven one thing: they would not go down without a fight. The final assault began under the cover of darkness. Mateo and his team stood at the edge of the forest, their silhouettes blending into the shadows. The faint glow of Cruz's estate loomed ahead, the last stronghold of the cartel's operations. Weeks of preparation had led to this moment, and there was no turning back. "This is it," Mateo said, his voice low but firm. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for the town, for everything they've taken from us. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out." The group nodded, their resolve evident despite the fear in their eyes. Diego adjusted. The straps of his pack, Rosa tightened her grip on her rifle, and Felipe murmured a quick prayer under his breath. They had all come to terms with the risks, but the stakes were too high to falter now. Using the tunnels Rosa and Felipe had discovered, the team slipped beneath the estate's defenses. The damp, claustrophobic passageways echoed with every step, but their training kept them silent. Mateo led the way, his flashlight barely illuminating the narrow path ahead. He knew the tunnels would bring them directly to the heart of the estate. Bypassing the heavily guarded entrances, at last they reached the end point. Mateo signaled for the group to halt as he peered through a grate that opened into the compound's main courtyard. Guards were stationed around the perimeter, their weapons slung casually over their shoulders. They didn't know what was coming. "We split into 2 teams," Mateo whispered. "Diego, you're with me. Rosa, you take Felipe and the others. Set the charges on the vehicles and supply caches. We'll create a diversion and draw the guards away." Rosa nodded. "We'll meet back here in 15 minutes. If we're not back—" She trailed off, her eyes meeting Mateo's. "You'll be back," Mateo said firmly. "We all will." The teams moved into position, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Rosa's group worked quickly, planting explosives on the parked vehicles and supply crates scattered throughout the courtyard. Mateo and Diego scaled a low wall, positioning themselves near the guard tower. With calculated precision, Mateo took aim with his silenced weapon, neutralizing the guards one by one. The first explosion shattered the night. Flames erupted from a cluster of vehicles, sending guards scrambling in every direction. Mateo and Diego opened fire, creating further chaos as the cartel's forces tried to regroup. Rosa's team detonated the supply caches, the resulting blasts lighting up the compound like a fiery beacon. Amid the chaos, Cruz emerged from the main building, flanked by his personal guards. His face was twisted with rage as he barked orders, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Mateo saw his chance. "Diego, cover me," Mateo ordered, darting from his position toward Cruz. Gunfire erupted around him, but he moved with the precision and speed of his SEAL training. Cruz's guards tried to intercept him, but Mateo's team provided covering fire, picking them off one by one. Finally, Mateo reached Cruz. The cartel leader turned, his eyes widening in shock as Mateo tackled him to the ground. The 2 men grappled, their struggle a violent clash of will and strength. Cruz drew a knife, slashing wildly, but Mateo disarmed him with a well-placed blow. Pinning Cruz to the ground, Mateo leveled his weapon at him. "It's over," Mateo said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Your operation is finished," Cruz sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You think this will change anything? There's always another man ready to take my place." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Not here, not in my town." As the firefight died down, Rosa and the rest of the team regrouped. The estate was in ruins, the cartel's forces either dead or captured. Cruz was bound and handed over to the local authorities, who had finally arrived after weeks of inaction. The sun rose over the smoldering compound, casting its golden light on the weary but victorious group. The townspeople, hearing of the cartel's defeat, began to emerge from their homes, their faces filled with hope for the first time in years. Mateo stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching as the town began to reclaim its freedom. Rosa approached him, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," she said softly. Mateo nodded. "This was just the first step. There's still work to do, but we've shown them we won't back down." As the town began to rebuild, Mateo knew the scars of the fight would linger, but so would the strength they had discovered in each other. Together they had proven that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, unity and courage could prevail. The battle was over, but the story of the town's resilience was just beginning.